if a woman had a husband in the culture back then, that was her livelihood. That was her protection because most likely he worked, he farmed, he did something, and that brought in the income and took care of things for the household. And if he passed away, which he had because she was a widow, then if you had a male heir or a son, then most likely the Lord was going to work through the son to take care of those needs. And here we have her only son has died. And she has scary times ahead of her. There may be times ahead of her without Jesus stepping in, that when the sun goes down, that she would have had no meal. And there may not have been money to keep up clothes, and it might have been a situation with no shirt, no clothes that she could benefit from to keep her warm and to keep her dry. So things were not looking up for her if Jesus is not involved. Now, in the culture back then, they didn't have the embalming that we have today. They didn't have ways to preserve the bodies. They also had specific Old Testament rituals that you had to avoid being around bodies, or you were unclean for so many days. So it was pretty much, we need to get this person who is deceased to the cemetery that would be outside the city for purposes of ceremonial cleanliness. We got to get him out there. Now, sometimes in the culture, there would be hired mourners, people who were good at making noise. And that sounds bizarre to me, but it's how it was. So that was part of the crowd. There were some people who were there to be supportive and were there for the right reasons, but a lot of people may have just been there because there was a crowd and let's just go see what happens. And how many times do people go where the noise is? I remember when the apartment building caught on fire 3 years ago and everybody flocked out there and had to look at it. And then there was a situation in Johnson City one day or one evening where a man was threatening to do something and everybody was there to watch. And I was telling my friend, it feels like we've gone backwards as a country and we're not the loving, caring people we ought to be. And he said, you do realize that in the Civil War that some people would find a spot up on a hill and watch. And I was like, no, I didn't realize that. But maybe there's always been a way that people want to go where things are happening and see what there is to see. And so that might be part of what's going on here. So Jesus sees her and he has compassion. And when it says compassion there, it means like deep within him. It stirred something inside him. He was moved from the inside out. It was really hurtful to him to see what she was going through and to see that she was going to be destitute and not have a husband or a son to take care of her. So he gets involved and he says, do not weep. But, we've all gone through loss, and it's not easy when we go through loss. It's hard not to weep. It's hard not to be sad. So that's one of those things where Jesus is commanding something that might not be that easy to do. But he says, do not weep. So let's pause there for a minute. We've got this sickness, but we want to worry about it. We want to fret about it. Or we've got these car problems happening, or these appliance problems happening, and we want to worry about it. We want to fret about it. But the Christian way is you're trusting in the Lord to take care of you. Now, that may mean that there's times of plenty and that there's times of want. And Paul wrote, I've learned to be content whether I have plenty or whether I lack. But pretty much he lacked nothing because he had Jesus. And so that's an attitude that would be good for us to try to have. So Jesus comes forward, touches the bier, and the pallbearers stand and stop. So they quit moving it along. And he says, "Young man, I say to you, rise." And of course, we know the story goes that the young man comes back to life. But Jesus was risking making himself ceremonial unclean. That doesn't mean committing a sin. It just means, as far as ritual goes, you would have to stay away from people so many days in order to uphold the requirements of the Old Testament stuff. And he was more concerned about getting over here and doing the ministry and getting the work done. So, when we try to do ministry, things get messy. Sometimes we go to put something together and it falls apart. Shannon's got some really great ideas for decorating for Bible school, but we've decorated for Bible school before, and there may be some trial and error involved. Sometimes when we try to help people, it gets complicated. It gets messy. But Jesus modeled for us, go where the mess is, run into the fire, run into the flood, run into whatever, and try to help with what the need is. Because again, we're trusting him to take care of us. I think I shared this in Sunday school. That feels like 5 hours ago at this point for me. So therefore, it has to be okay for me to repeat myself a little bit. But when Jesus was saying, turn the other cheek, when he was saying, if they take this, give them that. When you gave them your coat or you gave them whatever, you were putting yourself in harm's way potentially, because you wouldn't have the coat, you wouldn't have the shirt, you wouldn't have whatever it was. And you might go somewhere and they say you can't get service because you don't have that shirt. But the Lord provides and he takes care of things. So what matters is just jump in and do it and trust that the Lord's going to take care of it. And of course, in this story, he does say, "Young man, I say to you, rise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. This is one of 3 times that Jesus raises somebody. There's Jairus' daughter, and there's Lazarus. So he's commanding, even at this earlier stage in his ministry, he is displaying and showing that he has power over death. All 3 people wound up dying a second time and will be part of a resurrection of faith one day, just as we hope in the power of that resurrection, that there's more to it than just this life. But he was showing in raising these people that he has power over death. It was a foretaste. It was a foreshadowing. It was a deposit on what was to come with him dying but not staying dead. So Easter was happening before Easter even happened. He was pointing ahead to it. Now, these people start talking about there's this great prophet that has risen among us. God has looked favorably on his people. They would have remembered that there was a widow's son who was raised by Elijah, and they would have remembered that there was a widow's son who was raised by Elisha. And they were very much hung up on those 2 prophets, 2 of the great prophets, and people thought that those were great prophets. And we even read in the Gospels where that people think that Jesus is maybe John the Baptist raised again. Maybe they think John the Baptist is Elijah come again. So people were looking for big stuff like that to happen, and they had it happening here in this situation. And so they're saying this great prophet is with us and God has looked favorably on his people. And then the word spread throughout Judea and all the surrounding country. It's great that they went and told about what he did. That's wonderful. We should go and tell about what the Lord has done. That's why I've been trying to thank God out in the open and praise God this morning about things that He's done and provided. And, I didn't wake up this morning and know we were going to wind up with an extra cooler fan and a few other things. And those are blessings, and we're thankful for those blessings. We're thankful that God is at work. But sometimes do we tell about things in a just tell it an exchange of facts instead of being passionate about this is what the Lord has done in my life? I mean, it's one thing to say God took care of this, and it's another thing to say God took care of this, and let me tell you how He did it. And our biggest problem was that sin problem, and He has taken care of that. So we do need to work, including myself, on being more passionate about telling that story. But there's also the reality that if you go tell the story, that not everybody's going to believe, because if people had truly believed in a way that they would carry out the excitement and what the Lord had done, then there would not have been as much questioning, are you really the Son of God? There would not have been as much doubts about who He was. There would not have been the constant, well, we need you to give us a sign kind of thing. And I think that the reason that Jesus marveled at that centurion that we talked about last week was he didn't ask for signs. He just knew Jesus could get the job done, and he trusted Jesus to get the job done. I appreciate that I've been pointed to good mechanics coming to church here who would get the job done. That's the kind I want to go to. I appreciate that we're excited about Bible school and have this meeting coming up, and we're going to put work into Bible school and try to get the job done. But it's one thing to just say, I went to church today. We sang some songs. The preacher got up and talked. He told bad jokes. He teased too much, things like that. But it's another thing to go and say, we talked about how God took care of this widow, and we talked about how God can take care of us, and how that we can trust the Lord and we can be excited about the Lord and what He's doing. And I hope that that's how you leave here more Sundays than having Sundays when you don't leave here that way. I hope that coming here, that you feel God's presence, that you are blessed by being around His people, and that it encourages you with, how do I keep going out here and being on mission? How do I keep going out here and shining this light? When it's all falling apart, we are like, Lord, why are you letting this happen to me? But then we have times of such blessing. And God is good whether it's going good or whether it's going bad. He took care of the salvation that we needed the worst. Let's do a little bit of application, and then I'm going to bring this to a close. Who do we know that is struggling to meet their needs? Who are the widows we know, or the widowers we know, or the people that have some kind of a burden that they feel like they can't carry? And as God's people, we need to give them our prayer support, and sometimes we have to get involved. And I'm thankful that I know of stories of how people in this church check on people who are in need. And I try to brag on you that I know that that happens, and I try to encourage you to keep doing that. But when you're doing that, you're doing things the way Jesus did it here, because He didn't leave this lady hanging. He went to her and took care of the need. And that's something that is always a good thing for us to do. And it's good for us to keep our eyes open for where else can the Lord use us, where else can we take His light, can we take His joy, and can we be a blessing?